So how can this drone technology support conservation in Anguilla? First of all, I just have to say, because I just love this picture, is one of my favorite things about Anguilla is all the beautiful salt ponds. I believe there's 13 or 14 of them in the country. If anybody has not been to Anguilla, it definitely is a unique feature, one of my favorite parts of the country. Like I mentioned, I go through this workflow with my teams when I train, where we don't just go out there and we fly and we're just going to map. We start with a workflow where you clearly identify, in order to be effective, there's lots of data you can collect out there with these drones, and you can collect it at really high accuracy and resolutions. But again, there's a cost to that. It takes time. It costs more money. It's harder to process. You need to have more skills. And so what I've realized is that people need to understand or start with the end first. You need to clearly know who's your audience, what applications are you going to use the drones for, and what scale, what types of data do you need? And so I walk all of my teams through this training, through this sort of needs assessment process where they can really clearly identify what are their goals. And that's what I'm going to just show you this process over the rest of the presentation, is what we did and how we did this in Anguilla. So we really sat down and we did a needs assessment, and then we trained, and we've slowly started to develop some of the workflows that they are going to need moving forward. So first, step one, we clearly identified our application. So when I talked to Anguilla National Trust, and this is even before I got there, so I like to really clearly know what their applications were. And they had told me they really wanted to look at birds and sea turtle conservation, invasive species, revegetation efforts, biodiversity monitoring of turtles, of birds, of sharks, conservation management, disaster risk identification, and vulnerability was another project focus for the Anguilla National Trust. And so they really wanted this focus of how they could merge this drone data with these other databases, because as Farah had mentioned, the Darwin project, it's not just about drones. It's a whole data handling, management, and analysis workflow that they are in an endeavor. They're just launching right now. So really, we were trying to think about how we're going to merge all this, how all the pieces can fit together. And so really, they also wanted to look at the different impacts and mitigation measures, as I mentioned, development of management scenarios, being able to track their management efforts over time, getting areas, being able to produce contours for the land, and then aiding discussion. Public outreach and education is a big part of the ANT's goals. How could they also use this information for social media, for sharing, for working with the public and other presentations? And then how can they get the communities and the stakeholders in Anguilla to engage with the drone photos and the drone data to participate with them in future efforts? So again, this was a two-pronged project. Their main applications were focusing on conservation and disaster risk management. So I actually took this picture right here the night before the storm hit. I was testing drones in high winds to see how they could handle. I'm sorry again. So 3 main mapping and monitoring sites were set up for them, or they determined were priority. So they said they wanted to look at Shoal Bay, and the applications at Shoal Bay were invasive species, the revegetation efforts, as well as bird monitoring, and there were some historical ruins within this site. Sherricks Bay, the focus there was bird monitoring. There's all kinds of salt ponds there, sea turtle nesting. There's also beach erosion, and coastal development is happening in this area. And then last, but definitely not least, is probably our big case study, which is Sandy Ground. And so we chose this again for multiple reasons. It's a soon-to-be protected area, disaster risk prone. It's got a low-lying fishing community. It's heavy tourism area, and also has local events. So it's important for the community. There's sailing and historical sites as well within this ecosystem. So at that point, we figured out, okay, this is the goals of where we're going to focus on. And then the drone mapping course. So over the course of the week, We learned how to set up the missions, how to plan them, understand the site and safety assessments, as well as how to fly. We did that the first couple days. And then we went out and we conducted at these sites drone surveys. And again, we applied, I taught them commercial operating, which are professional standards for drones, for drone flying on a commercial level. And then we processed the data and we went over the tools of the web-basing analysis tools, the AI tools, and then how to produce reports and share this information. The first case study, as I mentioned, this was Shoal Bay, and we were still learning how to fly. I think this was day 2 of training. We went out in the wild, as I like to say. We worked on a training field the first day, and then the second day we went out to Shoal Bay to do a little free flying. And you can see here, this is just one of the students took this video that you're seeing here at Fountain National Park. So this is just a small area. I think it's about 25 acres. You can see it's this green area. We're spinning around right here. And so the National Trust is managing and revegetating. I don't know if you can see when it spins around, there's a fence that goes around the property of this area. So there's a lot of information. Just taking a simple video like this, we're getting some great data and information, right? We could talk about, you can see the area of the sites where the ruins are within here and other features. But where things start getting exciting, I think, is when we start doing the drone maps. So the team, this was our first day. This was our demo training day, learning how to fly. So we mapped a very small area. It was like I mentioned, but it was the boundaries of this management area. It took about 7 minutes, 64 photos, and there's the accuracy and resolution of the product. But the drone went up, it flies in a grid across those green lines, and it snaps photos. And then you can see here's the photos that were taken. And then we upload those up into the cloud, and it stitches these together, and it takes out the distortion of the photos so that it's an accurate map that you can conduct true measurements on. And that's called an orthomosaic. And so here's the image, and it's a 3D because it has elevation to it too. So that's why it looks 3D here. And so you can see the boundary of the area there. I think you might have a little laser. And then you can see here. So then you can turn on these different layers. This is the elevation model. So this is computerized and generated out of that. And you can already see the difference right there in the elevation, the way it slopes down that last part. And then there's another tool that we learned how to use called the plant health tool. And this really identifies plant health and variability. And you can see here those lines that go across the middle there, which is drainage, I believe, but maybe the National Trust can tell you about that. I know they had mentioned to me the meaning of that and I forgot, sorry. Okay, so the next site that we went out to map here was Sherricks Bay, West End Pond. And you can see this is the product there from Sherricks Bay. The applications here, we're really looking at the mangrove restoration site, bird monitoring. We flew this and the previous mission using a DJI Air 2 drone. This is just an off-the-shelf drone that you could buy at the DJI store with a regular RGB camera. So we're not using fancy tech here. So 125 images were captured to produce this orthomosaic. It's about 35 hectares. So I think that's close to 60, 75 acres. And so again, you're going to see this West End Pond is broken into multiple pieces. Why? Because I had the team break up the map. We could have flown it in different pieces because this is their first day. They planned and conducted this fully on their own. So you can see multiple different pieces of the orthomosaic were flown. But then on this day, we also learned a different type of flight plan. We learned how to do something called a 360 panorama. And in a moment, I'll show you one of those live. But it goes up and it takes pictures in a 360 view. And we were experimenting, flying at different heights and using these for birds. And why are these exciting? Because you can zoom in and you could count birds in the trees, or you could zoom in and see, and these sorts of imagery is really useful for a community presentation. It's not as technical as a drone map, and you can have some great discussions based on panoramas.